Hey everyone, welcome to Karenology. Today's story will make you laugh, cringe, and probably yell at your screen. Let's go. Funny thing is, you think you know your neighbors. You wave at them every morning, nod at the mailbox, maybe even swap pies during the holidays. But you don't really know them. Not until one of them calls the cops on your wife for walking your nephew to school with her service weapon holstered at her hip. Not until they say she's a danger to children. It was 8:04 a.m., sharp, when it started. And I remember that because I'd just finished tying my boots in the driveway when I saw her. Karen Vander, floral robe, oversized sunglasses, clutching her coffee mug like it was a grenade. Her little white dog was halfway, tangled in its leash, yapping like it had seen a ghost. And right there, just a few feet from her, was my wife, Susan, full uniform, duty belt, right hand resting lightly on the shoulder of our 9-year-old nephew, James. They were walking toward the crosswalk. Susan bent down to say something to the boy, probably reminding him to look both ways. And that's when Karen let out this sharp little gasp, like someone had slapped her with a wet rag. She pulled out her phone, started filming. She's armed. She's carrying a firearm around children. I stepped forward, already feeling my blood climbing up my neck. Ma'am, she's the sheriff. That badge isn't just for decoration. Karen didn't look at me. She turned the camera straight on Susan and shouted louder. There's an armed woman here in uniform walking a minor onto school property. This is a threat. I'm calling the police. She is the police, I snapped, but she was already dialing. I wish I could say it ended there. I wish I could say Susan walked James across the street, gave me that little nod she always does, and we all laughed it off as Karen being Karen. But this wasn't the usual HOA nonsense. This wasn't about grass height or mailbox paint. No, this was personal. This was war. By the time Susan came back from the school drop-off, 3 squad cars had rolled into the neighborhood. Sirens weren't blaring, but the lights were flashing just enough to make every curtain on the block twitch. I saw them step out, guns holstered, but hands close. They looked confused, not alarmed, just unsure, like they'd gotten the wrong address. Susan walked toward them, calm as ever, one hand up, badge in the other. Good morning, deputies. The younger one, a fresh face I didn't recognize, spoke first. Ma'am? We got a call about an armed suspect near a school zone. She's not a suspect, I said, stepping in. She's the sheriff, your sheriff. The older deputy, mustache and a jaw like a square shovel, nodded slowly as if it was dawning on him. Susan Rhodes? That's right. Karen stood off to the side now, phone still rolling. Arms crossed like she'd just won something. So you're telling me it's okay for her to flaunt a gun in front of children? She barked. She's in uniform. She's on duty. Mustache grunted, clearly annoyed. But it didn't matter. Karen uploaded the video by lunch, and what she uploaded wasn't the calm badge presentation, or Susan's greeting. No, she'd cropped it just right. A uniformed woman, gun visible, next to a small boy, her voice trembling. Look at this, armed and dangerous. By that afternoon, the school board had gotten a dozen calls. PTA members were circulating petitions. Local moms groups were in full meltdown. And Susan? She was summoned for a courtesy review by the Homeowner Association because apparently they'd received concerns about neighborhood safety. Not a police matter, mind you. A neighborly matter. I remember sitting on the porch that night, listening to the cicadas and watching Susan pace inside, fingers locked behind her back, like she was preparing for a battle she hadn't seen coming. She was always tough, tougher than me in some ways. But that night, I saw something different in her eyes, something raw, not fear, not yet, but hurt, betrayal. She stepped outside eventually, sat next to me, and handed me a warm beer. I've been in 3 standoffs, took a bullet in 2012. But you know what stings worse than all that? What? I asked. And being treated like a threat in your own town, in your own home. We sat in silence. The kind that isn't heavy, but isn't light either. Just there. You want me to do something? I finally asked. Because I will, whatever it is. She looked at me with a faint smile. No, not yet. Let them show us who they are first. And oh, they did. The next morning, someone left a folded flyer in our mailbox. No return address. No signature. Just a black and white printout with Susan's photo. The same cropped image from Karen's video. Beneath it, bold letters, "Is this who should protect our children?" It was only the beginning, and I'll tell you what. That was the moment I stopped caring about lawns and noise ordinances. That was the day I realized that what was coming wasn't going to be neighborly at all. By the time I pulled the flyer from the mailbox, the ink had already bled slightly from the morning dew. It smelled like mildew and toner. I held it in my hands longer than I should have, just staring at Susan's photo, that grainy screenshot framed like a wanted poster. My gut churned. Susan was already gone. She'd left early, quiet as a whisper. Didn't even finish her coffee. I found her travel mug still half full on the porch railing. That's how I knew she didn't sleep. I stood in the driveway, staring at the neighbors' lawns. Nobody was outside, but I could feel the curtains shift, the eyes watching. I wasn't paranoid. People always think they're subtle. But this kind of fear, it makes them sloppy. James came out with his backpack, already zipping up his jacket. Is Aunt Sue in trouble? I knelt down, smoothed his hair back. No, bud. Grown-up's just acting dumb. She's fine. And she is. Karen said she was a bad guy. I felt something tighten in my chest. Karen doesn't know what she's talking about. He nodded, unconvinced. I walked him to the school, holding his hand the whole way. You'd think walking a kid to school would be a peaceful thing, but every porch I passed felt like a jury box. And I wasn't on trial. Susan was. When I got back, I found a voicemail blinking on the machine. It was from Pete Laramie, president of the Homeowner Association. Pete had a voice like molasses poured over sandpaper. He said they'd like to address community concerns, and that Susan's presence in uniform was unsettling to some residents. Unsettling. I laughed out loud. The woman who'd saved 2 kids from a house fire last spring was now unsettling. I called Susan, straight to voicemail. I didn't blame her. By noon, I was pacing. I didn't know what to do with myself. So I trimmed the hedges, washed the truck, scrubbed the mailbox, Anything to keep my hands busy. Anything but sit still. At 2:17 p.m., the doorbell rang. It was Kelsey. She lived across the street. Early 40s, single mom, 2 kids. Always polite, always distant. Today she looked different. Tight jaw, eyes darting. She handed me a manila envelope. I wasn't going to give you this, but Karen printed a bunch of them. She's planning to put them on every door tomorrow. I opened it. More flyers. Same photo. Same line. Is this who should protect our children? But it's not just that, Kelsey whispered. She's talking about organizing a petition to have Susan removed as sheriff. My throat went dry. She can't do that. She thinks if she gets enough people to sign, she can pressure the mayor and the school board. I looked at her. Really looked at her. And you? I think it's disgusting. I think Karen is a bored bully who finally found a target. And I think this town is too damn cowardly to stand up to her. That night, Susan came home after dark. No words. She peeled off her duty belt, set it on the kitchen table, then stared at it like it was something foreign. She's going after your job, I said. Susan didn't flinch. She'll need more than a petition. She's got people. She's working them, twisting them. Susan turned to me. Then we let her twist. I'm not stepping down. I admired that. God, I did. But I saw the shadows under her eyes, the slowness in her step, the silence growing between us. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of something outside. A rustle. A clang. I grabbed the flashlight, stepped out barefoot. Spray paint. Red. Across our garage door. Baby killer. I stood there for a long time, letting the beam of light settle on those 2 words. My hands clenched. My jaw ached. I didn't clean it. Not right away. I needed Susan to see it, not to hurt her. But because this wasn't petty anymore, this wasn't about gossip or signatures. This was a campaign, a cold-blooded one. The next morning, Susan walked out, duffel bag in hand. She stopped, stared at the door, said nothing. Then she turned around, walked back inside, and changed into civilian clothes. I'll work remote today, she muttered, and I watched the uniform stay folded on the kitchen chair all day, like a flag draped over something we hadn't buried yet. We kept the garage door closed that day, not because we were hiding it. We just didn't want to give Karen the satisfaction of knowing we'd seen it. Red paint on white siding. It wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. It was loud enough to echo in every corner of that damn cul-de-sac. Susan barely looked at it. She went straight to the kitchen, poured herself black coffee, and opened her laptop. Not a word. Not a sigh. Nothing. I spent the morning calling the sheriff's office. Told them to rotate her duties remote for the week. They agreed. They respected her. At least, most of them did. But even in their voices, I could hear the hesitation, like they weren't sure how deep this whole mess would go. Around 10, a dark green pickup truck pulled into our driveway. I recognized it immediately. Deputy Kane. He was older than Susan by 10 years, built like a grizzly and twice as blunt. Used to be her mentor. They'd served together in one of the roughest districts south of here. But something in him changed after the last election. After Susan got promoted and he didn't. He stepped out without knocking. Just walked into the backyard where I was splitting wood and said, "She home?" "She's working," I answered without looking up. He grunted. She needs to lay low. These people don't want her here. I turned, splitting axe still in hand. What people? Us? The neighborhood, the board. I hear things. I wiped my hands and leaned on the axe handle. You here on official business, or just to deliver a warning? He didn't answer. Just pulled a folded paper from his vest and handed it to me. A printed screenshot from a private Facebook group. Karen's post. Hundreds of comments. Some anonymous, some real names I recognized. Accusing Susan of being a danger, of politicizing law enforcement, of militarizing the suburb. Then Kane said, "She's not just a cop anymore. She's a symbol." And symbols are easy targets. I watched him walk back to his truck. His shoulders hunched like gravity had doubled on him. And in that moment, I realized Kane wasn't warning us. He was distancing himself, picking a side. That night, Susan said she wanted to take James out for ice cream. Just the two of them. She said she needed normal. I didn't argue, but they never made it to the ice cream shop. A mile from our house, a white SUV cut them off at an intersection. Two men got out, unarmed, unthreatening, but loud. Cameras out. One shouted, "Why are you traumatizing this child with a gun?" The other tried to open the passenger door. Susan got out. Calm. Composed. Showed her badge, her ID, everything. Still, the men circled, filming, narrating loudly, calling her rogue, unstable, trigger-happy. James was crying in the back seat. Susan called it in. By the time backup arrived, the men were gone. But the video was already online. And it was edited the same way. No badge, no context. Just a furious woman with a gun arguing with civilians while a child screamed. When they got home, James ran straight to his room. Susan stood in the doorway, shoulders trembling. I moved to hold her, but she pulled away. "Don't," she whispered. "If you touch me right now, I'll break." That was the first time I ever saw her cry. Not in the line of duty, not after funerals, not after promotions, but now, in our hallway, over a lie that was eating her alive. The next day, a letter came from the Homeowner Association. Stamped. Official. They were recommending suspension of uniformed presence within the neighborhood until concerns were adequately addressed. Translation: they wanted her gone. And I knew then we weren't dealing with neighbors anymore. We were dealing with something coordinated, something that knew exactly how to tear a person down. Funny thing is, I used to believe in the system. I really did. But watching my wife be dismantled like that, piece by piece, post by post, that changed me. I didn't know it yet, but a different version of me was waking up. The version I'd buried after the army. The one that didn't wait for justice. The one that made it. And if they wanted a problem, they'd just found one. 3 days after the video incident, Susan stopped wearing her badge. Not just at home. At all. She moved it from her nightstand to the bottom drawer of her desk, under old files and receipts. Said it was just temporary. Said she was tired of explaining it to strangers in the grocery store, in the gas station, in line at the bank. I didn't say anything, but I noticed the way she walked. Slower, smaller, like every step had a weight to it. That morning, the school counselor called. James had refused to go inside. Said he didn't feel safe. Said people looked at him funny. They'd found him curled up behind a tree on the edge of the playground, arms wrapped around his backpack like it was a life raft. I picked him up. He didn't speak until we were halfway home. Are they going to take Aunt Sue away? No, I told him, forcing the words out. Nobody's taking anybody. But I wasn't sure I believed it. That night, Susan and I sat at the dining table, sorting through mail. Half of it was junk. A third of it was garbage disguised as petitions, anonymous complaints, a photocopy of the letter from the Homeowner Association, this time with a red circle drawn around the words public safety. Susan picked up the envelope, studied the return address. I chew. Did you notice this one came from Pete Laramie's law office? I hadn't. But now that she pointed it out, I saw the tiny embossed logo on the back flap. Pete wasn't just the association president. He was a lawyer, and a bitter, passive-aggressive one. He'd run for judge 5 years ago and lost. I remember the signs all over the neighborhood. Laramie for justice. I think this whole thing is a setup, Susan said quietly. Why now? I asked. She shrugged. Maybe I was just an easier target. A woman in uniform. A woman with authority. I couldn't argue with that. The next day, the ice cream shop where Susan had taken James posted a sign on their door. We support community values. Law enforcement welcome when off-duty only. The shop owner, Greg, had always been polite, friendly even, but he didn't return our calls. Later that week, someone keyed Susan's car in the parking lot behind the station. Deep, jagged lines across both sides. The word traitor carved into the driver's side door. She filed the report herself. Flat, emotionless. Then she took the report, folded it in half, and dropped it in the trash. I'm not giving them the pleasure, she said. I wanted to scream. Break something. But she wouldn't let me. She said they were baiting her, trying to push her into overreacting. And then came the internal memo. It showed up in her email late Friday. An official-looking notice from Deputy Chief Evans. Pending evaluation of community sentiment, field assignments for Sheriff Rhodes will be limited to administrative oversight and non-patrol duties. Translation: they were benching her. Politely, quietly, no hearing, no appeal. She stared at the screen a long time. Didn't move. Just clicked the email closed and shut the laptop. I sat down beside her. You're not fighting it? What's the point? She said. They don't want me seen. They want me invisible. She left the room. I stayed. Then I opened the laptop again. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe a contact. Maybe a name. Instead, I found something else. A folder Susan had labeled K Reports. I clicked it open. Dozens of files. PDFs. Scanned notes. Photos. Names. And one stood out. Kane. A report from 5 years ago. Internal complaint. Evidence tampering. Case dismissed after lack of follow-through. I kept reading. More patterns. More names. Most redacted. But one thread ran through them all. A subtle network of influence. Supposedly retired deputies tied to local associations. Private funders. Legal advocacy fronts. All wrapped in the same language. Community protection. I closed the laptop. Sat in the dark. Listened to the creak of the ceiling fan. I felt something inside me shift again, like a lock clicking open. This wasn't a campaign, it was a machine. And they'd just poked the wrong damn bear. I didn't tell Susan about what I'd found. Not that night. Not the next morning, either. I needed time to think, to make sense of it. Because if I was right, and every bone in my body told me I was, we weren't just dealing with Karen and her flyer brigade. We were up against something older, deeper, and a hell of a lot more dangerous. That Sunday, I went to the hardware store. Said I was fixing the gutter. I wasn't. I bought a burner phone, paid cash, left my own cell at home, told Susan I needed fresh air. She didn't ask questions. Her silence was getting thicker by the day. I drove 2 towns over, parked near a park and ride, and started making calls. The first 2 were dead ends. Retired deputies who either didn't want to talk or had memory issues that felt too convenient. The third one, though, Marla Jensen. She answered. Marla used to work internal affairs. Tough, sharp, fired under suspicious circumstances a year before Susan became sheriff. We'd met her once at a precinct barbecue, years ago. She'd brought her own beer, cursed like a sailor, and scared the hell out of half the rookies. I told her who I was, told her what I'd found. There was a pause on the other end. Then she said, "You better meet me in person." We met in a diner, just outside of county lines. She wore a hoodie and sunglasses like she was being hunted. She slid into the booth across from me and didn't even touch the coffee the waitress poured. You're in over your head," she said flatly. "But so was your wife. They've been circling her for months." "Who's they?" "Our retired brass, private security networks, political donors with suburban zip codes and a god complex. They don't like women in command. They especially don't like women who won't play ball." I told her about Kane, about the report. Her eyes darkened. That was my case. I submitted that complaint. "Why didn't it stick?" She leaned back. "Because Pete Laramie sat on the review board. Because Karen Vander is his cousin. Because the same people who ran the internal review also fund the Homeowners Political Action Committee." I felt my jaw tighten. So this whole thing... ISKNT was set in motion the day your wife refused to drop that investigation. You just didn't see the pieces yet. She handed me a flash drive. Proof. But be smart. You don't go public with this. Not yet. You show them you have it. Quietly. Subtly. Make them nervous. Back home, Susan was sitting on the porch, legs crossed, staring at the horizon like she was trying to remember something from a past life. I handed her the flash drive, said nothing. She took it, turned it in her hand like it might explode. "What is it?" "Leverage." We didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I drove to Pete Laramie's office. He greeted me with that smug half smile lawyers wear like cologne. "Can I help you, Mr. Rhodes?" I dropped the flash drive on his desk. "You can tell Karen to back off. You can tell Kane I know everything. And you can tell your donors I don't need a badge to make noise." His eyes flickered. Just for a second. That was all I needed. "You're bluffing," he said. Try me." I walked out without another word. By that evening, the ice cream shop had quietly removed their sign. The HOA site went down for maintenance. And Susan's reassignment email vanished from her department inbox. But none of that made her smile. Not really, because she knew this wasn't over. It was just the calm between punches. She stood at the kitchen sink that night, washing a single mug over and over, hands raw from the heat. Ansky, They're going to come at us sideways next, she said. Not loud, not obvious, but brutal. I nodded. Then we hit first. She looked at me for the first time in days. Really looked. You sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. She dried her hands. Then let's make it count. Soul. And just like that, the woman I married, the one with steel in her spine, came back to life. We didn't strike right away. That was the hardest part, waiting. But Susan was right. If we moved too fast, they'd see it coming. And when you're dealing with snakes, better to let them think you're still asleep. So we laid low, played normal. She went to the station 3 times that week, purely administrative, but it gave them the illusion she was defanged. Meanwhile, I dug deeper. Every night after James went to bed, we'd sit at the kitchen table, laptops open, quiet but electric with purpose. We mapped names, donations, Facebook groups, real estate transfers. The connections were there. You just had to tilt the picture the right way. Kane had family on the zoning board. Karen had a shell LLC that donated to 3 different neighborhood coalitions across the county. Pete Laramie's firm had represented all of them at one point or another. But it wasn't until Susan opened an old archive drive from her first year on the job that we found the nail. It was an incident report, a code violation call in a nearby subdivision. No backup logged, no citations issued, but the notes were handwritten, scanned, and tucked under a name Susan hadn't heard in years. Walter Green. Walter was a developer. Retired. Owned half the empty parcels in 3 neighborhoods, including ours. And he'd once been investigated for bribing planning officials to get construction variances. Charges dropped. Evidence disappeared. Case closed, except Susan had made a copy back then. And the initials on the bottom of the page? KV. Karen Vander. She'd been working as his community outreach liaison. That's what the file said. The same year she moved into our subdivision. I don't think she ever stopped working for him, Susan whispered. We stared at each other across the table. No one blinked. This wasn't about fear or politics. It was about land, money, influence. Karen had been placed here. Pete, too. Maybe even Kane. Not just to keep the neighborhood tidy, but to turn it into a model. Controlled, manufactured, profitable. That night, we made a plan. No more flailing. No more playing defense. We weren't going to expose them. Not yet. We were going to make them bleed internally. Susan reconnected with an old colleague named Brooks, now a state compliance officer. She fed him a carefully curated complaint about zoning irregularities in subdivisions linked to Walter Green. Nothing about Karen. Nothing traceable to us. Then I reached out to a friend I hadn't spoken to since Iraq. Darnell Doc Patterson. Tech-savvy. Paranoid. Owed me a favor. I asked him to dig into property deeds, tax IDs, LLC registrations. Nothing illegal, just messy. And messy was enough. By the end of the week, 2 of Walter Green's shell companies were flagged for audit. Karen didn't know it yet, but the floor beneath her was cracking. Then came the message. Hand-delivered. No stamp, just left inside our screen door. Typed precise. If you pursue this further, your nephew will not be safe. Susan read it in silence. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes didn't flinch. But I saw it. The change. The storm. She folded the paper, walked to the fireplace, and lit it with a match. When it was ash, she turned to me. They've moved the line. Yes. Then we move ours. The next morning, we pulled James out of school. We told him we were going on a road trip. Just the three of us. We drove 4 hours to her sister's cabin in the mountains. Remote. Safe. No cell reception worth a damn. And while James played with sticks and fed chipmunks, Susan and I stood in the woods, planning our next strike like it was a war council. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was clarity. We spent 3 days at the cabin. No phones, no noise. Just the sound of wind moving through pine needles and the occasional thump of a squirrel dropping acorns onto the tin roof. James didn't ask many questions. He was content, skipping stones and building forts from sticks. I envied him. Susan, though, she was different, calmer, focused. She moved like someone who'd stopped being afraid. That first morning, she took out a notebook and began listing names. Not enemies. Patterns, connections, the quiet machinery that made our little town tick like a rigged watch. On the third night, I asked her what the endgame was. She didn't look up. I don't want them arrested, she said. I want them dismantled. And I believed her. By Monday, we were back. I pulled into our driveway and half expected the house to be torched or tagged again. But it looked untouched. Too untouched. Like a stage set. Inside, the answering machine blinked. 5 new messages, one from Pete Laramie. Oily and fake friendly. Hope you're doing well, Mike. Just wanted to check in. See if we can resolve any misunderstandings before things escalate further. One from Deputy Kane. Tell Susan to be careful what doors she opens. Some don't close. And the rest? Silent static. Susan deleted them all without comment. That night, she called in a favor from her old academy instructor, now working as an ethics consultant for the state police. She sent him the anonymized zoning report. Within 24 hours, he confirmed what we'd suspected. Massive irregularities, traceable to Walter Green's holdings of pie, and pushed by HOA boards influenced by community advisors. Karen included. Then came the break we didn't expect. Darnell, my friend from Iraq, called from a burner. He'd traced one of Karen's LLCs to a lobbying firm in D.C. And guess who handled their compliance? Pete Laramie's law office. It was a loop. They weren't just covering each other. They were creating closed systems. HOA rules rewritten to favor development, then leveraged into larger state projects. Susan's presence as sheriff was never the issue. Her independence was. That same day, we received a formal invitation to attend a conflict resolution session hosted by the Homeowner Association. Neutral ground, community center, Thursday evening. Trap, I said. Susan nodded. Let's go anyway. We prepared for 3 days. Not for violence, for precision. We rehearsed what to say, what not to say. We brought documents, but no originals. We built a map of their influence on a whiteboard, labeled every player, highlighted every link. We knew who sat on which committee, who chaired which fundraiser, who served on which board. Thursday came. We dressed in civilian clothes, neutral colors, calm faces, but walking into that community center felt like stepping into enemy territory. Rows of folding chairs, a podium, and behind it, Karen, Pete, and 2 other board members, whose smiles were as thin as razors. Karen opened with faux warmth. Thank you both for coming. We know recent weeks have been challenging. Susan didn't sit. Let's not pretend this is about neighborhood peace. This is about control. Pete leaned forward, hands folded. Now, Susan, we're just trying to maintain the integrity of the community. Susan dropped a manila folder on the table. Photos, handwritten reports, property maps, tax IDs. This is your integrity, she said. And I've sent copies to 3 state agencies. Silence. Then Karen spoke, and her voice was quieter than usual. You're bluffing. Susan's eyes didn't move. Am I? That moment held for too long. Long enough to see Pete's throat bob when he swallowed. Long enough to see the board members exchange glances. Long enough to hear the hinge of the power dynamic begin to creak. We left without another word. Back home, I poured Susan a glass of wine. She didn't touch it. Aber, they're going to panic now, she said. They're going to make a mistake. I leaned back in my chair. And when they do? She smiled for the first time in weeks. We'll be ready? It started unraveling faster than we expected. By Saturday, the HOA website, freshly restored, featured a new notice. Due to unforeseen administrative complications, upcoming policy revisions will be postponed until further review. Translation. Their little land grab schemes were frozen. That same afternoon, Susan got a call from Brooks, the compliance officer. He kept it brief. One of Green's shell companies just pulled out of a zoning petition. Someone's running scared. Whatever you're doing, keep going. But that's when things turned. Sunday morning, we woke up to flashing red and blue. A patrol cruiser sat across from our house, lights spinning, but no siren. At first, I thought it was a welfare check, but when I stepped outside, I realized the officer wasn't facing our house. He was watching it. Susan walked out behind me, arms crossed. The officer, young, clearly nervous, lowered the window. Gosh, just routine, he mumbled. Command wanted increased visibility. Susan stepped closer. Who signed the order? He didn't answer. She wrote down his unit number. He drove off 5 minutes later. But the message was clear. They were trying to rattle us. Let us know they still had reach. We spent the next few days in lockdown mode. No unnecessary trips. No open blinds. I set up motion-activated lights. Susan backed up every file to encrypted storage. We turned the house into a bunker. Quiet, alert, waiting. And then the hammer dropped. Wednesday afternoon, Susan received an official letter from Internal Affairs. An anonymous complaint had been filed alleging misconduct, abuse of authority, and failure to act with impartiality. The charges were vague, but dangerous. Enough to justify suspension pending review. She stared at the letter for a full minute, then handed it to me without a word. They know they're cornered, I said. Esther, they're throwing matches at gasoline. It wasn't fear I saw in her eyes then. It was clarity, a terrifying kind of calm, the look of someone who's already lost everything and now has nothing left to protect but the truth. I'm going to let them do it, she said. What? I'm going to step back. Officially. Let them think they've won. Let them feel bold. Arrogant. Why? Because people like them don't collapse from pressure. They collapse from overconfidence. I didn't like it. Every part of me wanted to fight. Loud, direct, and brutal. But she was right. They were predictable and desperate. So, the next morning, Susan made it official. Temporary leave, citing mental health and stress recovery. She submitted it with grace, silence, and an eerie smile. By the end of the day, Karen had already hosted a celebratory coffee with her HOA ladies. Photos of cupcakes and pink banners that read, "Our neighborhood, our values." We printed every photo, archived every comment, tracked every user who shared them. They thought they'd won, and that's when the trap snapped. Thursday night, Brooks called again, this time with more than a whisper. There's been a leak, he said. Emails from Pete's firm. Karen's involved. She's been funneling development kickbacks through an HOA grant program. State Ethics Board is opening a file. It's going to go public. Susan was sitting across from me, fingers steepled under her chin. Her eyes closed, listening. They have one day, she said. One day for what? To bury themselves, or dig deeper. Either way, they're already holding the shovel. That night, she wrote a letter, not to the state, not to the press, but to every household in our neighborhood. It wasn't angry. It wasn't accusatory. It was a story. Hers. A quiet explanation of what had happened, what was still happening, and what the truth actually looked like behind the curtains. She printed it, folded each one by hand. James helped. He liked the paper folds, thought it was a game. By dawn, every mailbox had a letter. No signature, no threats. Just a flashlight beam cutting through fog, and we waited. That afternoon, Pete Laramie was seen entering City Hall with 2 lawyers. Karen skipped her weekly HOA walk. By sundown, 3 board members had publicly resigned. But it wasn't over. It was about to get loud. The noise came fast. By Friday morning, the story had legs. Local radio picked it up first. Community grant scandal under investigation. Then the regional outlets followed, circling like hawks. They didn't name Karen or Pete, not yet. But the dots weren't hard to connect. By noon, the HOA website went dark again. And Karen's smiling photo was quietly removed from the board roster. Susan didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. She just sat at the kitchen table, watching the steam rise from her coffee like she was waiting for something else, something bigger. It came at 3:42 p.m. A black SUV pulled into our driveway. 2 men in plain suits stepped out. One had a badge. State Ethics Commission. They weren't here for Susan. They were here to collect files she'd organized, annotated, and sealed in a weathered brown box labeled Operations. No drama, no cuffs, just a quiet exchange and a thank you. Then they were gone. I watched her exhale. You think that's the end? I asked. No, she said. That's the beginning. That night, Susan sat down with James. Explained everything in words he could understand. About bullies, about truth, about standing tall even when the wind tries to knock you down. He listened, quiet and wide-eyed, then hugged her like he didn't want to let go. The next day, she returned to the station. Not to work, not yet, but to speak. She gathered the department. Stood in front of every deputy, sergeant, and desk clerk. She told them the truth. Not just about what had happened, but about what she'd learned. About trust. About power. About why the badge matters only if you remember who you wear it for. Halfway through, I saw Kane in the back, arms crossed. Then, slowly, he nodded. Just once. He'd lost his war, and he knew it. Monday morning, Karen's name officially disappeared from the Homeowner Association's public records. Pete took a leave of absence, and the state announced a full audit of suburban zoning boards tied to private development grants. Susan never issued a statement, never took credit, but people knew. Neighbors we hadn't seen in weeks started waving again. Some stopped by with flowers, awkward apologies, warm casseroles. We didn't need any of it, but we accepted it. Not for them, for James. So he could see that sometimes, even when the world turns on you, it can turn back. A week later, Susan went back on duty. Full uniform, full authority. No speeches, just action. Karen? Last I heard, she moved to Florida. Bought a condo in a gated community. Still wears that same smug smile in the photos. Only now there's less people standing next to her. And me? I went back to splitting wood, fixing gutters, living quiet. But I never forgot what they did. And I never forgot what it took to win. Because we didn't beat them in court. We didn't beat them with votes. We beat them by letting them reveal who they really were, and by refusing to flinch when they did.